My guest today is Mike Berry, the principal of Richmond Elementary School, and he has an amazing story to tell you about how he got his school and school district up in podcasting. Mike Berry, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this.
You know, I love your story. We connected on Twitter, and you have actually successfully started a podcasting program in your elementary school. What is that all about?
So at the beginning of this year, on kind of a whim, I decided I was going to try podcasting. And actually, the very first episode pretty much says that. I say, I'm just going to try this and we'll see what happens. And it took off, and in a big way. I started picking a topic or two and sharing it out to the community. And really, in a school, there's no shortage of material. Just taking out my iPhone and recording a preschool student talking about what they learned about in snow or ice or weather, and turning that into something magical for parents and families and teachers to share was pretty incredible. And it's also kind of addictive because you want to share a lot.
How long were these first shows?
The first show, it's funny, I took some flack for it. The first show was only 2 or 3 minutes, and I said, I'm just going to give this a try, and I recorded something and the audio wasn't great, and there weren't smooth transitions or anything like that, but I gave it my best. And then the next ones after that all kind of went to around about 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, I'm able to cover 2 pieces. So I might do, I did a piece about the Pilgrim unit in 2nd grade, and the second half of that episode was about the SBAC assessments. So I'm able to mix it up a little bit and hit multiple grade levels and groups of parents that might be interested.
And take us through the history here. Once you got this elementary show started, you then decided to look a little bit bigger, and you created the MMUSD Podcast. What's that all about?
That's right. So also as an addict of podcasts, I listen to all sorts of great things like Radio Lab and all of those great examples of podcasting. And you can see how powerful a show like that can be. And so our school podcast was great. It was doing really well. And I talked to our assistant superintendent and said, hey, what do you think about something a little larger encompassing all the schools in our supervisory union? And they said, sure, give it a shot. So the first episode was about the implementation of math menu approach in our schools, and it was a huge hit. And the purpose of this podcast, as opposed to our school podcast, is to really help flatten our organization and really start to increase innovations in education by sharing those ideas with each other.
Mike, when you do these shows, who is your audience? Are you creating this for the parents, for the teachers, for the students so they can hear themselves? What is your goal with these shows?
Yeah, so with the RESVT podcast, that's really for our school community. That's for our parents and our students, but also to the teachers so that they know that we're appreciating and recognizing their hard work. With the MMUSD podcast, that's more oriented towards educators. However, within that, it's not bad for the community to hear what we're doing and seeing all the great innovations that we're working on. I always say people can't support what they don't know. So for them to see how the level of professionalism and the level of learning that we're doing by talking about things like math menu, our next episodes are going to be about writer's workshop and the art of conferring with students. That's powerful too.
Speaking of Mike Berry here, you can, of course, find on Twitter at Principal Berry, Berry. Mike, let me ask you about these first couple episodes. How did you sell this idea to the community that it's even something that they want to listen to? I'm sure many people up there, like everywhere in the country, has this idea of what is a podcast? How do I use it? How do I work it? What was the sell that you used to get it into your community?
Yeah, I went with a soft sell. I put it out there, and it started pretty small, and I shared it on Twitter. We had established a pretty good social media plan at our school. We have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook page, we have a Google Plus page, all of those things. So I fed it through there, and it started to pick up momentum. And then I started to share the specific episodes with the specific grade levels that were in the episode. So those teachers might have shared it with their parents, and it started to increase, and the subscription started to increase. And then we actually embedded on the front page of our blog, which is embedded on the front page of our school website. And I think that's where a lot of the plays come from. So that even if you're not savvy with podcast subscriptions or podcast players and you don't have Stitcher on your phone, you go to that website and you can play it right on your PC or your computer. And I think that that's what's happening with our school community.
Well, let's take a look at that website that you're talking about here. You have created MMMUSD Podcast.com. And let me bring it up here. Now, you created this website in WordPress. Is this self-hosted, or is this WordPress.org or .com? How did you make this website?
I believe this is hosted with GoDaddy. I can't claim any credit for the website other than some work and help from our music teacher, Chris Arthur. He really led the charge on this. He's an amazing photographer and a designer, and he's very familiar with WordPress. We worked together on what the layout would look like. We're working on updating it. We want to make it a little bit smoother. And as we're starting out, we don't have a lot of content, so we're working on figuring out how we can do that, and also establishing some extra social media accounts that go with this podcast.
I think you're doing a fantastic job here. I noticed that you put all your audio files in SoundCloud. Why did you choose SoundCloud? Is there a cost involved, or what does it take to actually get a show from your school up onto sites like iTunes and Stitcher and whatnot?
So when that's a great question. When we first started this school podcast, we really stuck to SoundCloud exclusively, only because it's really easy to embed the player. That's really how it started. And then from there, it became easy for us to upload directly to Stitcher, and we're working on cleaning up our iTunes feed. So it was a good place to start, and it's pretty safe. But as many people know with schools, if you can do it with no budget, that's probably the best way to do it.
Well, let me piggyback on your word safe. I'm looking all around here, and you've got young students' pictures on podcasts, on websites. Did you have to sell this to the parents first and get another permission slip? Is this part of the acceptable use policy? Why do you have all these kids on your website?
That's a great question. I think it's because we took a long time to establish that trust with our community. They know what we're doing with our social media accounts. We've been using them for a long time, even before we started podcasting. So the practice of kids' pictures being up there has always been in place. We do have an acceptable use policy all laid out for parents and families, and we are very, very careful and open with parents. Often, if I do a particular piece, or a child's going to be on the front slideshow of the website or something, I'll call the parent and say, hey, I just want to check in with you, make sure this is okay, even though I already have their permission to do it, just because I want them to know. And 10 times out of 10, they're super proud to have their kid up there and to be a part of that. We avoid names. We don't put names. We don't put identifiable pieces up there or anything like that. But people have really responded strongly and positively to having their kids involved in something so great.
And again, looking at your website here, here's our front page. We've got a really nice slider. We've got our episode here. But then you've also taken the time here to put together a YouTube channel that I would really recommend anybody subscribing to. You've got two videos up here. They are short videos. They're fantastic. And then scrolling over here, we've got you've even set up a Google Plus page, which is amazing, which has had almost 4,000 views. Fantastic work. And then your Twitter account for this is at MMMUSD Podcast, which, I mean, the work on here, the tweets that you're putting out, I have to ask the silly question. Are you proud of your school district, Mike?
Yep. And yes, I am. And what's great is being able to go around to these different schools and record teachers. Two things happen. One, they say, what is a podcast and what's doing? And they're a little bit nervous about it at first, but then they really get into it and they feel like somebody's listening to them and really asking some deep questions about their pedagogy and their instruction, and they get charged by that. And what happened after our first Math Menu podcast is the people that were involved in that called me or emailed me afterwards and said, Mike, that is super awesome, and I feel like I've been recognized for my hard work. And I also learned something by hearing what those other teachers were saying. And that's what this is about, is being able to connect those pockets of innovation throughout all our schools. We're less than 10 miles apart in most cases, and sometimes we don't know that the teacher down the road is doing something so amazing that we can go learn from them.
So you have your show. Are you still doing the elementary show in addition to the district show?
Yes, I'm still doing both. I'm going to produce 2 episodes this weekend, one for the school and one for the MMUSD podcast.
Now let me ask you about what you just said. You, the principal, are the one that's producing these, or is somebody doing the work for you? Come on, tell us.
No, I am producing most of them. I have help from my music teacher, Chris Arthur. He also has a music podcast that he does. But we're working out a workflow for our new MMMUSD podcast. Mm-hmm. It's pretty tough because we're both working hard during the day to figure out how we can team and share, but we've got some great ideas. That's down the road. So far, I've produced the episodes.
And how does this produce? I think when we were talking before the show started, you said you're using iPads or iPad apps.
Right. So when I first started, I used GarageBand on the iPad. That's all I used. And with that, it's very clunky. You're using a stylus and moving. When you have a lot of audio tracks, that's not a lot of fun. So that's where we started. And then I got a little bit savvier, and Chris helped me with some apps and some ideas, and I learned a lot more. And eventually we had some Mac Minis that were donated to the school, and we retooled those and got those up and running. So now I use a field recorder when I go into a classroom, and it gets really crisp, great audio. It was a very inexpensive device. And then I bring that back and I dump it onto the Mac Mini, and I produce in GarageBand and upload directly to SoundCloud.
So can you give us a little bit of the podcasting budget? If a school is looking to get into podcasting, how much money should they, again, sky's the limit, of course, on things, but what
Sure.
is it actually costing you to do this podcast? And that I'm asking websites, equipment, microphones.
Right. I think you can do a good quality podcast with an iPhone or an iPad. You can. I believe you can. If you're really good at the art of storytelling and think about what you want your story to sound like, I think it can be done. Having said that, we bought a Tascam field recorder for, I think it was less than $80. I don't even think it was that much. And that's really all you need if you have access to GarageBand. So if you don't, GarageBand would be a cost. We also we're moving up to the next levels for us. So we bought some cables and a mixer and a microphone, and I would say approximately $300 to $400. We were able to get some good quality equipment.
Very, very nice. It is really nice to see that I always ask the question, can you podcast for free? Yes. You can open up your iPhone, and the native voice recorder app is a great recording tool. For a couple bucks, you can get a microphone. For a couple more bucks, you can maybe get a mixer.
Right.
Are you seeing excitement from the students with this because they're on a podcast? Are you seeing students or even teachers wanting to create shows of their own outside of this? And what would you say if I'm a student and I came to you and said, how do I get my show on iTunes? I'm in 5th grade. Yeah,
that's a great question. I'm starting to see more kids aware of it. They're asking me all the time, are we going to be on this podcast? What I see from teachers is that they're listening more often. They're still a little hesitant about maybe doing a show or me coming in and recording, but they are listening and they think it's pretty awesome. I was thinking about this the other day. I have lunch duty every day with one grade level, and I was thinking, you know what? I should do a lunch duty podcast with these kids. We could set up a table with the mics and we could host a show each week. And I think that kids are really ready for stuff like this and they're excited to do it. Everyone in my school always sees me with a camera and a microphone, so it's kind of become a joke that they're ready to jump in. But with that comes a higher level of comfort for people and kids to take a risk and try that stuff.
When I had asked you earlier, Mike, about your audience, you said it was the community. As a principal who is in charge of a faculty, do you use podcasting, or have you considered using podcasting as a way to share your weekly announcements or maybe some of the things that are important? Do you leave your staff audio files rather than writing out long emails?
I have thought about that many, many times. I've thought about the different ways to get information to everybody. It's just tough because I think you want to make sure there's some people that text is the best. They love to read text. They want it in paper. There's some people that email works really well. Some people Google Docs. Some people audio would be great. I think for those that commute, the audio would be awesome. That's what I do, and I listen to podcasts all the time. But it's tough to figure out what's the most efficient way as an administrator to get that stuff out to your staff, but also what's the best for your staff. And I don't know that podcasting would work really well for my staff for that, but what it's working really well for my staff is me sharing learning about some of the initiatives that we have going in our school district. So that Math Menu podcast, for example, that was a whole bunch of sharing about an expectation in our SU that teachers are implementing Math Menu. And here was my reflection experience going out and researching that for them. So it was another way of reaching them, but not quite the nuts and bolts of the weekly thing.
Nice. It's great to see these new technologies and new mediums being used in ways that have never been used before. Let's take a look a little bit higher than the elementary level. Has your superintendent ever been on one of your shows, or would your superintendent be ever open to using a podcast to maybe talk to the community or to, fireside chats, if you will, with the students? What do other administrators in your district think, or have they tried this?
Yep, that's a great question. So on our RESVT podcast, our superintendent's been featured 3 times telling stories to third graders, and they're wild stories. He grew up in the Northeast Kingdom, Vermont, and he tells all these stories. One's about a bear trap that is infamous in our school community because it's just hilarious. So he's done that. And this week for our MMUSD podcast, we're doing our first roundtable podcast on Tuesday, where our assistant superintendent, Jen Botzjorns, is going to join us, as well as 3 teachers, and we're going to talk about some pretty hot questions around student learning. Try and get some interesting conversation going.
Mike, I want to say thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. You are absolutely an inspiration to educators who are trying to get into this medium of podcasting with their students and being creative. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, what advice would you give somebody? Let's say that you're a principal or a superintendent trying to get their school district up onto iTunes or onto Stitcher. What advice would you give them?
I would just say jump in and try it. It feels like a risk, and it's a little bit weird to hear your voice on audio and all of that, but get over it. Just jump in and do it, and you'll find some amazing learning for yourself through doing this.
Talking here with Mike Berry, the principal of Richmond Elementary School. Mike, where can we get a hold of you, and how do we subscribe to this great podcast?
So you can get a hold of me at Principal Berry on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to do it. To visit our MMMUSD podcast, you would go to MMMUSDpodcast.com. And you can find our RESVT podcast on SoundCloud and Stitcher.
Excellent. And we'll have all the links to these shows up in our show notes for educational podcasting today. This is episode number 4. Mike, congratulations again, and take care. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, sir.
National Podcast Day is September 30th. But what is National Podcast Day? It's pretty simple, and you can help spread the word. National Podcast Day is dedicated to promoting podcasting worldwide through public engagement. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved with National Podcast Day? It's easy. Head over to nationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. But ultimately, these options are endless. Remember, September 30th, nationalpodcastday.com, and let's start the conversation.